Hey everyone, and welcome to our deep dive today. We're going to be tackling something that I think a lot of us have thought about at least once or twice,
Yeah.
and that is social media addiction. Now we're going way beyond just, the feeling of like our phones are glued to our hands, right?
Yeah.
We're really going to be getting into some of the psychology and the nitty-gritty,
Yeah.
and we're going to be doing that with help from this article. The real reason we're all addicted to social media and how to escape.
It's a good one.
It is a really fascinating read. So it
Mhm.
kicks off with this idea of a dopamine hit. Like you get a notification
Uh-huh.
and boom, it's that little rush of excitement. Have you ever noticed that in yourself?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, the article goes on to explain how this plays into this whole dopamine loop thing,
Oh, interesting.
which is really what these social media platforms are kind of built on?
Wow.
It's those quick rewards and the likes and the comments, and just even seeing that little red notification badge.
Right.
They're designed to trigger these pathways in our brain that make us just crave more and more.
So it's like they've tapped into something that's primal.
It's almost like a slot machine in a way.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I hadn't even thought about it like that. So it's not just that it makes us feel good. It's like actually changing how our brains work.
Exactly. And that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Oh, boy.
The article outlines 4 major psychological mechanisms behind this whole addiction thing.
Okay, I'm ready. Let's hear it. What makes these platforms so hard to resist?
Well, we've got the instant gratification, which we just talked about.
Okay.
But then there's this whole social validation piece.
Okay.
And this is where our very human, deep-seated need for belonging comes into play.
Yeah.
Social media with all its carefully curated profiles and highlight reels, it taps right into that.
I definitely have felt that pressure to present the perfect version of myself online.
Oh, for sure. It's almost unavoidable these days. And when you're looking at everyone else seemingly living these amazing lives, it's so easy to fall into that comparison track.
Totally.
And that can really impact your self-esteem.
Yeah.
There's even research that's shown that just the simple act of seeing likes on other people's posts
Really?
can actually trigger activity in the reward centers of our brain.
Oh, wow.
So it makes us want those likes for ourselves.
So it's not just about keeping up with the Joneses. It's like our brains are literally wired to seek that out.
It is. And then there's FOMO,
The fear of missing out.
the fear of missing out. Oh, it's a master manipulator of our emotions. That sense of urgency, the need to be constantly plugged in so you don't miss something important or exciting.
Yeah.
It's such a powerful driver.
Oh, I know. If I don't check in regularly, I get that little pang of anxiety.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm out of the loop.
I mean, think about how often you check your feed during the day. Are you really looking for connection, or is it that little nagging feeling that you're going to miss out on some vital piece of information?
You know what? It's probably a little bit of both, if I'm being honest.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm kind of starting to see now how those feelings are being, exploited almost
Yeah.
to keep us hooked.
Well, and that brings us to the fourth mechanism,
Okay.
algorithmic addiction.
Now, this is something I've heard a bit about, but I don't fully understand it.
Well, we're not just passively scrolling. The content we see is being curated by these algorithms that are designed to keep us engaged.
Yeah.
They learn our preferences, they learn our habits,
Huh?
and they feed us more of what they think will keep us glued to the screen.
So it's not just that I'm choosing to be on social media. It's that they're actively trying to keep me there.
Exactly. They're designed to maximize our engagement.
Wow.
And often that means exploiting our vulnerabilities and our psychological biases.
Okay, this is getting a little unnerving, I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
I mean, if these platforms are designed to be addictive, what chance do we have?
That is the question, isn't it? And it's one that we'll explore in more detail a little later.
Okay.
But first, I think it's really important to dive into the consequences of this addiction.
Yes.
Because they're way more significant than we realize.
Let's unpack that. What are some of the real-world impacts of all this scrolling and liking and sharing?
Well, one of the biggest concerns is the impact on our mental health.
Ugh.
We are constantly bombarded with information and images of seemingly perfect lives. Notifications are always vying for our attention.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. And so it's no surprise that this can lead to anxiety, depression, and even feelings of loneliness.
It's so easy to feel overwhelmed and inadequate
Totally.
when you're constantly comparing yourself to other people online.
Exactly. And then there's the impact on productivity.
Oh, yeah.
Have you ever noticed how time just seems to slip away when you're scrolling through those feeds?
It's like a black hole.
It is. It really is. They're designed to keep us engaged, to make us lose track of time. And that constant stream of notifications, that endless scroll, this is all part of the plan.
I am seriously rethinking my relationship with all of this.
I know, right? And it's not just our time that's being affected.
Oh.
Social media addiction can also really strain our real-life relationships.
Okay, so how does that work?
Well, when we're constantly glued to our phones, we're not really fully present with the people around us.
That's
We miss those important cues and those conversations, and even just those simple moments of connection that are so crucial for building strong relationships.
I've been guilty of that.
Yeah, and then there's the potential for misunderstandings and jealousy.
Oh, yeah.
Social media often presents such a distorted view of reality that it leads to these unrealistic expectations and comparisons that can create friction in our relationships.
So it's like we're trading real connection
Totally.
for a bunch of superficial likes and comments.
Exactly. And that's the real tragedy of social media addiction. We're sacrificing our well-being, our time, and our relationships for something that ultimately leaves us feeling kind of empty and unfulfilled.
Wow, this is a lot more than I thought it was, when we started talking about this.
It really is. It goes so much deeper than just, spending too much time on our phones.
So much deeper.
It's a complex issue with some really far-reaching consequences. But the good news is that we're not powerless.
Okay, I need to hear this.
There are strategies we can use to break free from this cycle of addiction and reclaim control of our lives.
Okay, that's what I want to hear. Tell me more. How do we start to break free from this hold that social media has on us? So we've uncovered some pretty concerning stuff about social media addiction, but I'm really hoping we can talk solutions now. Like, where do we even begin to, untangle ourselves from all of this?
It's interesting you use the word untangle because it really is about recognizing, where those threads of influence are coming from and strategically loosening their grip.
I like that analogy.
Okay.
So how do we identify those threads? Where do we even start?
Well, the first step, and this might sound deceptively simple, is awareness. We need to shine a light on our own social media habits. Without judgment, how often are we checking those apps? What's motivating us to pick up our phones in those moments?
So it's not about beating ourselves up
No.
for being addicted. It's more about understanding the patterns.
Exactly. Once we have that awareness, we can start setting boundaries.
Okay.
And this is where things get practical. We can establish specific times during the day when we allow ourselves to check social media.
Right.
Or maybe we create phone-free zones in our homes.
I've heard of people putting their phones in a basket during dinner.
Yeah,
Seems extreme,
it does.
but I can see the benefit.
It's about finding what works for you. Maybe a basket's too much, but what about just simply turning off notifications for a while?
Oh, that's a good idea.
Those constant pings are designed to pull us back in, triggering that fear of missing out.
I hadn't thought about it like that, but
Yeah.
it's so true. Those little red dots
Yeah.
and the pings and the rings, it really is like they're manipulating me.
They are, it's subtle, but incredibly effective.
Yeah.
And while we're on the subject of manipulation,
Uh-oh.
let's talk about curating our feeds.
Okay.
We've talked about how those algorithms can keep us trapped in that cycle of addictive scrolling.
Right.
But remember, we have some control here too.
You mean unfollowing accounts that make us feel bad?
Exactly. If seeing a certain person's perfectly filtered life is making you feel envious or inadequate, unfollow them.
Just get rid of them.
You have the power to choose what you consume. Surround yourself with content that inspires you, that motivates you, that makes you smile.
You know what? This is kind of making me feel a little bit empowered
Good.
because it's like I'm not just a passive consumer here.
You're not. You have agency. And that sense of empowerment is key because it reminds us that we're not just passive consumers of whatever these platforms throw at us.
So we've got awareness, we've got boundaries, and we're curating our feeds. What other tools can we use?
Well, the article also talks about mindfulness.
Oh, mindfulness.
I know it's kind of a buzzword these days. Yeah.
But it's really about training our brains to be more present and less reactive to those external triggers like the notifications or that urge to constantly check our phones.
So instead of mindlessly scrolling when I'm bored or anxious, I can actually practice being present in the moment.
Exactly, things like meditation or deep breathing exercises, or even just taking a few moments to appreciate the world around us. These can all help us build that mindfulness muscle.
It's interesting because what you're describing sounds a lot like instead of looking for that sense of peace and balance from the outside world or from our phones, it's about finding it within ourselves.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah.
And speaking of finding things within ourselves, the article also suggests replacing the habit.
Okay, what does that mean?
Well, what are those core needs that social media is attempting to fulfill? Connection, validation, entertainment. And how can we address those needs in healthier, more fulfilling ways?
So instead of scrolling through my feed for 2 hours,
Yeah.
I could call a friend or go for a walk or read a book. Exactly. It's about finding those real-life substitutes for that digital dopamine hit.
And those real-life experiences are much more satisfying.
They are.
Okay, I'm getting this. But what about those times when we just need like a more drastic approach? Like,
Yeah.
what if we've tried all this stuff and we're still feeling hooked?
Well, that's where a digital detox can be really powerful.
Okay, what is that?
It's like hitting the reset button on our relationship with technology.
So a complete break from everything.
It doesn't have to be forever,
Yeah.
but even just taking a day or two off social media can be incredibly beneficial. It gives our brains a chance to break free from that constant stimulation and reconnect with the world around us.
It's almost like cleansing our palate. You
Yeah.
step away from the digital buffet for a while,
Yeah,
and suddenly the real world seems much more vivid and flavorful.
exactly. And when we do return to social media, we're more likely to do so with a fresh perspective, a greater sense of awareness, and hopefully a little bit more control.
This is giving me hope,
Yeah.
but I'm a little anxious about disconnecting, even for a short time.
That's understandable. Change can be uncomfortable, especially when it comes to something as ingrained in our lives as social media.
Right.
But remember, you don't have to do this alone.
That's true. What about seeking professional help?
That's always an option. If you're struggling to manage your social media use on your own, talking to a therapist or counselor can provide invaluable support and guidance.
That's such a good point. There's no shame in asking for help,
No, not all.
especially with something like this.
And there are a lot of different types of therapy that can be helpful.
Oh, yeah? Like what?
Well, you've got cognitive behavioral therapy, which focuses on changing those negative thought patterns. And then there are mindfulness-based approaches that emphasize present moment awareness.
This has been so insightful. But it's a lot to process. Where do we even start to put all this into practice? It feels like we've gone really deep on this.
We have.
But it's clear that there's no quick fix here. This isn't about overnight changes. It's a journey, right?
It's a journey. And like any journey, there are going to be times when you feel lost or you stumble off the path a little bit. But the key is to keep moving forward.
I like that progress over perfection.
Exactly.
So as we're wrapping things up here, what's one key takeaway that you really hope our listener walks away with?
At the end of the day, I think the most important thing to remember is that we have more power than we realize. We've been talking about how these platforms are designed to keep us hooked, how they exploit our vulnerabilities. But understanding those mechanisms is really the first step
Okay.
to reclaiming our agency.
It's like once you see those strings, you can start to untangle them.
Exactly. And that sense of empowerment is what fuels lasting change. It's not about becoming some kind of technology-hating hermit.
Right.
It's about using these tools consciously and intentionally in a way that supports our well-being.
I think that's a great way to put it. It's not about demonizing social media. It's about finding a healthier relationship.
Yeah.
So before we go, do you have any final thoughts for our listener? Something to inspire them to take action?
I would encourage everyone listening to think about what you truly value in life. Is it connection, creativity, learning? And then ask yourself, how can I use social media or even my time away from social media to cultivate those values more fully?
I love that it's like flipping the script on the whole thing.
Yeah.
Instead of letting social media dictate how we spend our time, we can use it to actually align with our values.
Exactly. And that's where real fulfillment lies, not in the endless scroll, but in the meaningful connections and experiences that make life rich and rewarding.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. I know I've learned a lot,
Me too.
and I'm feeling really inspired to make some changes.
It's all about taking those small steps.
It is. And to our listener, we are cheering you on.
We are.
Until next time, stay curious and stay mindful.